This chapter talks about the increase of depression and anxiety of students who arrive at the college. The author, who suffered from depression and started to practice CTV, observed that colleges were not the main cause of the wave of mental illness among their students in the United States. Colleges tried to solve this mental illness of their students with a new culture of safetyism. However, well intended protections may backfire and make things worse. Then, in this video, we are going to talk about how is mental health changing on campus and off, and why did the new culture of safetyism emerge only after 2013. First, it's necessary to talk about the first generation that started to enter college in 2013. Jen Twenge, a social psychologist, explained in her book iGen the most detailed generation behavior. She explained that iGen is the generation after the millennials and suggests that 1995 is the first birth year for iGen. Its name comes from Internet generation because it is the first generation to grow up with Internet on their pocket, and it is also called Generation Z. Internet generations means social media generation too. The period from 2007 to roughly 2012 was a brief span in which the social life of the average American teen changed substantially. It was until after the iPhone was introduced in 2007 and was widely adopted over the next few years that social media platforms drew many middle school students. Social media grew more and became more addictive. For example, in an interview, Tim Parker, the first president of Facebook, explained it. In short, iGen is the first generation that spent its formative teen years immersed in the giant social and commercial experiment of social media. Well, taking up the issue of increasing safetyism, Twenge's analysis suggests that there are two major generational changes that may be driving the rise of safetyism on campus since 2013. The first one is that kids now grow up much more slowly. Activities we thought that mark the transition from childhood and adulthood are happening later, as having a job, driving a car, drinking alcohol, going out on a date, and having sex. Members of IGEN wait longer to do these things that did members of previous generation as millennials, and they again do less of them instead of practicing in these activities which usually involve interacting with other people face to face. Teens today are spending much more time alone interacting with screens. The second major generational change is a rapid rise in rates of anxiety and depression that Jimmer is going to explain us better.
Related with the second mayor, as you can see, it says that female are more related to suffer depression and anxiety. However, when we are talking about suicide, it seems that male are more related to commit suicide than girls.
What means anti-social media? Well, some correlations with the increase of depression and anxiety are related with the increase of electronic device use, such as smartphone, tablet, or computer, and watching TV. On the other hand, there are five activities that have inverse relationship with depression. For example, attending religious service, reading books and another print media, sport and other forms of exercise, in-person social interaction, and doing homework, which means that kids who spend more hours per week on these activities show lower rates of depression. Part of what's going on may be that device take us away from people. Human beings are an ultra-social species. Of course, social media makes it easier than ever to create large groups, but those virtual groups are not the same as in-person connection. They do not satisfy the need for belonging in the same way. As Strange proposed, um, It is worth remembering that humans' neural architecture evolved under conditions of close, mostly continuous face-to-face contact with others, including no visual and no auditory contact, touch, olfaction, and that decrease in or removal of a system key inputs may risk destabilization of the system, which means that electronic devices are harmful, but not just because they take kids away from face-to-face interaction. There are more insidious effects, with, which are felt more strongly by girls. Why is it mostly girls who suffer? Well, that's going to be explained by Jim.
Now we are going to talk about why is it mostly girls who suffer depression and anxiety. The previous graphs shows that mental health had deteriorated much further among Asian girls than among Asian boys. Furthermore, to the extent that children are doing specifically the approximate number of hours per week dedicated to various activities, including the use of devices. Twain says that finding relationships that are statistically significant, but that in general are still small in magnitude. That does not mean that the effects of smartphones are small. It only means that the amount of variance in mental illness that we can explain at the moment using existing data is small. If we have better measures than what children are doing and what is happening to their mental health, we could explain the variation much more. These problems are very new, and it's much more research is needed before we know why the rates of mood disorders began to increase so quickly in the 2010s. The second reason is that social media may be harder on girls, is that girls and boys are aggressive in different ways. Research by psychologist Nikki Crick showed that boys are more physically aggressive, for example, by using social media to make sure other girls know who is intentionally being left out. When you add it all up, there is no overall sex difference in total aggression, but there is a large and consistent sex difference in the preferred ways of harming others. Plus, if boys' aggression is generally delivered in person, then the targets of boys' aggression can escape from it when they go home. On social media, girls can never escape.
Who arrived safetyism at the college? The body at the US College for May 2017 was almost entirely IGEM because the oldest member of IGEM began graduating. These are precisely the year in which the new culture of safetyism seemed to emerge from out of nowhere and which college mental health clinics found themselves suddenly overwhelmed by the new demand for filling the lengthening waiting list for psychological counseling at the university across the United States. For example, the number of students describe themselves as having a mental disorder increased from 2.7 to 6.1 for male college students between 2012 and 2016. That's increase of 126%. For female college students, it rose even more from 5.8 to 14.5, an increase of 150%. What occurred is that anxiety and depression rates were already increasing for teenagers who arrive at the college and for those who never attend a college as well. Clearly, universities were not causing a national mental health crisis, they were responding to one. And this may explain why the practices and beliefs of safetyism spread so quickly after 2013. Safetyism teaches students to see the world as violence and to interpret ideas and speakers as safe versus dangerous, rather than true versus false. That way of thinking about words is likely to promote the intensification of a call out culture, which of course gives students one more reason to be anxious. Depression and anxiety tend to go together and create strong negative emotion compared to their no anxious period. Anxious students are therefore more likely to perceive danger in innocent questions, leading them to embrace the concept of microaggression. Depression distortion cognition too, and gives people much more negative view than are warranted about themselves. Problems loom larger and seems more pervasive. For example, learned helplessness when a person which is when a person believes that escape is impossible, hence stop trying, even if the new situation where effort will be rewarded. Another example, when people are depressed, they use hostile attribution bias, which means that they are more likely to see hostile in beginning or even benevolent people. Communication and situation misunderstanding are more likely to escalate into large scale conflicts. Thus, we can see how depression and anxiety cause change in cognition, including a tendency to see the world as more dangerous and hostile than it really is.
Now, what about screen time? A caution about a caution. According to the author, it says that the increase in mental illnesses in adolescents is very large and it's found in multiple data sets, but the percentage of the increase that can be attributed to smartphones and screen time is small, and the evidence is more indirect. According again to Twenge, uses the available data on those datasets report crude measurements of what children are doing, specifically the approximate number of hours per week dedicated to various activities, including the use of devices. Twenge says that finding relationships that are statistically significant, but that in general are still small in magnitude. That does not mean that the effects of smartphones are small. It only means that the amount of variance in mental illness that we can explain at the moment using existing data is small. If we have better measures than what children are doing and what is happening to their mental health, we could explain the variation much more. These problems are very new, and it's much more research is needed before we know why the rates of mood disorders began to increase so quickly in the 2010s.